Hey, Ellen, listen, I know how Paco loves his afternoon nap, so I want to make sure that I get him out in time. That's what I love about him. I love him a long time. That afternoon nap's important.
I just want to know if he's.
Listen.
I want to know if he's wearing Bermuda shorts and flip flops with his suit and tie. That's all I want to know.
Yeah, he's mastered that Sports Center look.
Yeah, sandals. I have to get my afternoon nap too because I'm a retiree. So welcome to the club. Let's get started. Here. Thank you all for being here. Dennis, are you ready for us to go? Good to go? Perfect. Yes, perfect. We are here. Okay. Good morning. Welcome to our Federal Leaders Forum. Thank you for joining us today from Facebook Live, YouTube, and on Zoom. As you know, BAPAC is a nonpartisan organization. BAPAC's purpose is to ensure San Diegans, especially Black people, remain economically, politically, and socially relevant. BAPAC is an advocacy organization that we really lift up the underserved and under-resourced communities here in San Diego. And as we enter the November 2020 voting midterms, BAPAC, we thought it was important that we hear from our federal leaders that represent us in Washington, D.C. and work alongside the President of the United States, President Joe Biden. And let me now introduce our elected officials that are here with us today. I want to note though that Dara Issa was invited. They did reach out and we will be convening with him on another day, thanks to the flexibility of technology and Zoom. Sarah Jacobs also was invited and she also will be joining us at another time, but we want to thank Mike Levin from D48 and Scott Peters from D52 and Juan Vargas from D51 for joining us today. And I like to always say Juan Vargas is my congressman, and we haven't worked him enough. At least and I will be working you pretty soon.
Good.
Vargas, we're a long time relationship with Juan. And as we get into this, I just wanted to remind us all. People have my kids were asking me this morning, what do federal government officials do? So it reminded me they're responsible for preserving government against external and domestic threats and supervising and resolving conflicts between private and public interests, regulating the economy and protecting political and social rights of the citizens and providing services, and also lifting up legislation and resolutions on our behalf. We have the honor of two moderators, our own Mitch Mitchell, who is the Senior Vice President of Diversity and Community Partnerships at SEMPRA, and also our Miss Cheryl Phelps, who is the Communications Director for ACLU and SDIC. And we have an hour to spend with these elected officials. So Mitch Mitchell, I'm turning it over to you. And then you and Cheryl can run the show. I want this to be interactive. Listen, folks, just a housekeeping matter. If you have questions and comments, please put them into the chat. Also leave your mute button on because this is an interaction between our elected officials and our moderators. If we have time at the end, we'll respond to some of the questions in the chat, but for sure we will respond in writing and get back to you as soon as possible. It's in your hands. Thank you.
Ellen, it is always a pleasure to be here with the BAPAC family, and I love these forums. I think they're so important. And one of the things that we've talked about is that if you're not paying attention, then you're not going to be able to complain about, whether progress is happening or not. Now, politics is about people seeing and feeling things. And right now, there's a lot of emotion in the country. So this is going to be a great discussion today, and I'm excited about it. And right out of the gate, we're going to talk about what has really dominated the airwaves over the last couple of weeks, and that is the Inflation Reduction Act. And we're going to start out of the gate with that, with the questions related to this. Going to spend the next 15 minutes on that. And we're going to go in alphabetical order to begin with Mr. Levin, then Mr. Peters, and then Mr. Vargas. So right off the bat, I'm going to say this, that when you see all the press around it, it talks about a couple of components that this amazing piece of legislation talks about prescription drug price reform and Affordable Care Act subsidies extensions and energy and security and climate investments and then some corporate tax aspects. But for you three, what would you tell people they should be most excited about with regard to this amazing piece of legislation and how it affects them? And we'll start with you, Mr. Levin. Congressman Levin.
Well, first of all, thanks, Mitch. Thank you for having us. Thanks to BAPAC and Ellen and everybody involved in this. And thanks to my friends and colleagues, Scott and Juan. And we work very, very well together as a region, I think. Sarah as well. And I'm glad that Daryl's going to give you some time also, because there are issues where we work together with him. I think the Inflation Reduction Act is one of the most historic pieces of legislation in recent memory. The three elements that you just pointed out are all a very, very big deal, Mitch. With regard to climate, it's the biggest climate bill in the history of the United States. In fact, the history of any country, $370 billion. And I'm super proud to have been on the select committee on the climate crisis these last 3.5 years. And then a lot of what we fought for, not everything, but a lot of what we fought for made its way across the finish line. And I would put that into two specific buckets. First is all of those policies that will dramatically reduce greenhouse gas emissions, 40% from 2005 levels by the end of the decade. That's huge, and that's what gets a lot of the attention. But equally, if not more important, are all the changes to industrial policy, all of the incentives to encourage the next generation of clean tech entrepreneurs or clean tech project developers to make sure that they're advancing those technologies here at home. We'll, in 20, 30 years' time, be using a whole bunch of new technologies to get around, the cars we drive, the way we move goods around, the way we build buildings, the way we grow food, the way we generate electricity, all that's going to change. And we'll have all these new technologies, new companies, new jobs. And the question that I always ask is, are we well positioned for those jobs to be here in the United States and specifically in our region, in San Diego, in Southern California? And I think we are as well positioned as any region anywhere in the country for the clean energy jobs of tomorrow. You brought up healthcare as well. Huge, absolutely huge, to finally allow Medicare to negotiate prescription drugs. And I thank Scott for his efforts and advocacy to make sure that happens. I wish it was starting sooner, in terms of how people, because you brought up how people will feel it. Some of the clean energy provisions they're going to feel immediately. The prescription drug, Medicare negotiation for prescription drug take a couple years before it really kicks in. And then over time, it's going to expand. And the other thing that people will feel immediately is the ACA not having their healthcare premiums double at the end of the year, which would have happened had we not passed the IRA. Last thing I'll say, because I want to have an open discussion on what you hear from my colleagues, is the way we pay for this. There's a whole lot of misinformation out there. You're not going to have armed IRS agents come to your door.
Exactly.
And we looked at, and this has been an ongoing discussion for a long time, the biggest corporations in America, companies like Nike and HP and Whirlpool. I'm not picking on those companies. We use all their products, but they haven't been paying anything in corporate taxes. And you use the Amazon example. We know Amazon paid about 6% of their record-breaking profits last year. And so we can do better than that. So this bill just sets a floor of 15%. It's fair. I talk to small businesses all the time, and I ask the small business owners, you don't have to pay zero. You got to pay your fair share. That's all we're asking, as for big businesses to do the same. It'll reduce the deficit. The Committee for Responsible Federal Budget says it'll reduce the deficit by $1.9 trillion with a T over the next 20 years. By the way, it's this exact same number that the 2017 tax cuts that Trump passed with Paul Ryan, that increased the deficit by 1.9 trillion. So now we're cleaning up their mess and decreasing the deficit by that same amount.
Thank you, Congressman Levin. Let's go to you quickly, Congressman Peters. Now, I mean, obviously, there's a lot of discussion about this prescription drug amendment, this piece. I mean, this has been a topic of conversation for years about Medicare and the ability to negotiate. So is this what you would literally be out there touting as your favorite part of this incredible piece of legislation?
Yeah, Mitch, we put a lot of effort into this particular piece of legislation because as it was first drafted, we were really concerned that it was going to actually dry up a lot of private investment in San Diego that was really important. And we believe we could achieve the same reductions for seniors with a different version, and that's what passed. So we're really excited about that. The provision will be that we will cap out-of-pocket drug costs for seniors at $2,000 a year. And there's a smoothing mechanism in case that bill comes due too early and you can't take the cash flow. We'd be able to pay it over the course of the year. There's no such cap like that. We're doing that because for the first time, we're allowing the government to negotiate prices with Medicare. And also a $35 a month cap on the price of insulin. Why is that important for this community? Ellen, I think you probably know that Black Americans are 1.5 times more likely than white Americans to have trouble affording their medication, 2 times more likely than white Americans not to fill prescriptions due to costs. That can't persist. We would have liked, by the way, for this to go beyond Medicare, but because of the mechanism we used, which was reconciliation, we were only able to do a bill with 50 votes or 51 votes that affected outlays and revenues for the federal budget. So we couldn't do the whole economy, but this is a great start and able to have an effect beyond Medicare. I'll turn it over to Juan, but just two more things. On the subsidies for the ACA, about 3/4 of Black Americans have access to plans today with $50 monthly minimum premiums or less. If we didn't extend those subsidies, that would end and put a lot of folks at risk in this community. And I agree with certainly everything Mike eloquently said about climate change, but we should also point out part of that is environmental justice block grants for underserved communities around the country, so that we know that a lot of that money will be going to help communities who are affected by pollution issues and climate issues directly. So we're really proud of how that came out. And I'd be happy to hear from my colleague, Mr. Vargas, who's, by the way, nothing wrong with the afternoon nap.
Nope, nothing at all. Congressman Vargas, what are your thoughts on this? Again, a big fight, a lot of work. What are you touting most?
Well, first of all, thank you again for inviting me. I really do think it's an honor to be here with everyone, and I appreciate it very much. And Ellen, thank you very much. It's an honor to represent you in Washington. I think that my colleagues did a great job of explaining, what this will do. For me, really, the most exciting thing was the Affordable Care Act. Just to be frank, there's a lot of people in my district that rely on what I call Obamacare, my buddy Obama. Mm-hmm. The reality is that this would have, taken away their health care. I was desperate to get this fix, and this fix is in this Inflation Reduction Act. It's a big deal, especially for my community, my district, African Americans, Latinos, and Filipinos. It's a big deal. Obviously, the clean air, clean water, the issues associated with carbon, all those are very, very important. We're going to spend $389 billion. And again, going to create, I think, real opportunities in the United States for these new technologies, not only wind, solar, geothermal, but other things that we probably don't even know about at the moment that'll get us to reduce our carbon footprint. So those are very, very exciting. Prescription drugs, of course, once again, in my district, people need some help when it comes to these costs, and this is going to be very, very helpful. So it's a tremendous thing. One of the things that hasn't been said yet, and I'll tack this on because I think my colleagues did such a good job, and that was recently there was a Supreme Court case that took a lot of the authority of the EPA to regulate carbon dioxide away from them. And that is that EPA wasn't able to take a look at some of these poisons really that are, causing a lot of harm to our environment. And this bill gives them authority to regulate carbon dioxide and some of these other issues and important matters that the Supreme Court, the conservative court, took away from them. I think that that's very important. It hasn't been mentioned yet, but it is very important. With respect to the IRS, there's not going to be these armed IRS coming after you unless you make 400 grand and haven't been paying your taxes. Exactly. And they're coming after you, man. Mm-hmm. So pay your taxes. But again, this is for people that are multimillionaires. Sure. It would only affect Scott Peters here.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because what
pays taxes.
It pays its taxes. One of the things that I want to say before I turn to Cheryl is that when they were printing everything, one of the big provisions they pointed out was IRS tax enforcement. And I thought, I didn't look at that as one of the things they should have put in there. You know, what I will say to all three of you, and I think this is really important to the Black community, to the Latino community, to anybody that understands, I always frame life as a life is about necessities and luxuries: food, shelter, necessities. Healthcare is a necessity, not a luxury. So I would agree with all three of you that the work done on the prescription drug price reform and the work done on the ACA and the subsidies, that's all about a necessity. As someone who is on the board for Sharp Hospital, we always say this, that the people that walk in the door that are the sickest generally come in because they didn't have healthcare coverage and they've waited far too long, and the problem is worse. So I commend all of you for in particular, and I would always frame it as healthcare is a necessity, not a luxury, and we're all proud of the fact that you managed to get this part done. So Cheryl, I think you had a follow-up question to this on this one. Do you want to ask that now?
Yes, I do. Thank you. And thank you, gentlemen, for your comments and for your work on this. It was an impressive victory. And as an observer of Congress, having worked there for a long time, a bipartisan victory, that was one of the things that made it so notable to me. And so I'm interested, now that it's passed into law as a bipartisan measure, what do you anticipate to be the things that you'll be able to rally around in the future? Without the divides that we've seen. And I'll throw this out there to any one of you, but I want to limit our responses because I know we want to talk a little bit more about this. Maybe each of you take a minute to talk about what you see in the future where you can engender this kind of bipartisan support.
So what I would say, Cheryl, is that there were elements in the Inflation Reduction Act that did get bipartisan support, but the actual passage of the bill, unfortunately, we couldn't get we couldn't get any of our Republican colleagues to vote for it. They voted against all the things that ought to be common sense. And that's really sad. So there are other positive signs, though, when you look at the Chips and Science Act, the microchip and semiconductor bill that we passed. When you look at the Honoring Our Pact Act, that's for veterans exposed to burn pits. That was bipartisan. When you look at the infrastructure law, that was bipartisan. When you look at the bipartisan Safer Communities Act, the biggest gun violence bill in 30 years, that was bipartisan. So I would just say we need to try as best we can with everybody that wants to work with us. I always say I want to work with everybody that wants to work with us, who's willing to share our values and try to get things done for people who need the help the most. But I'm proud of the fact that we stood up and we acted with the Inflation Reduction Act in a way that is really going to help a lot of families across this country. And I was very disheartened. Really brief. I was for part of the debate that morning on the IRA. I got to sit in the chair. I know Sarah got to do it that day as well, and that forced me to listen to all the Republican debate during that, which I would not have listened to all of that. And I was so disheartened because time and time again, their tired talking points, they were defending, in my opinion, wealthy corporate tax cheats, big business, big oil. It was very clear which party was going to stand up and fight for people and which one just wasn't. At least not needed the help. Thanks, Cheryl.
Thank you. Congressman Peterson, Congressman Vargas.
So I would say I agree with Mike. Look, we still have a lot of things ahead of us. We haven't solved all the climate issues. We haven't really made healthcare a permanent fix. We got a 3-year extension out of this. So I think we're all committed to working with Republicans to get something that's durable over time, because to the extent you can do it with Republicans, it's more durable, it's more stable, and it's less a shooting target for politics. But I would say the other thing is, it was great to pass the legislation, but now it's about implementation. We have to work with the administration to make sure that this all gets done well. Just a couple stats for this community on public transit. We're investing $89.9 billion for public transit. Black workers are 4 times more likely to use it than white workers. 31% of employees are Black compared to 12% of the overall workforce. That's money that doesn't say African-American in it, but it's targeted to Black communities. Same with Superfund sites, $21 billion to clean up sites, 26% of Black Americans live within 3 miles of a Superfund site. And I just say one other thing, the digital divide. We used to talk about rural broadband. When Juan and I came to Congress, that's what people talked about. The pandemic shows us that there's a digital divide, even in wealthy areas like San Diego.
Yep.
Black families are 9% less likely to have access to high-speed internet than white families. If we implement this bill correctly, we close that divide. So we got to keep our eyes on the prize. Big step, passing legislation, getting the money. Now we got to make sure it gets to people.
Excellent.
Yeah,
Congressman
you know,
Vargas.
hope springs eternal, and I do hope that we can get to some bipartisan agreement. You know, we did do something on gun safety with Republicans, and I wish that we could do more, and we have to push for more, especially with these automatic weapons. I mean, it makes no sense to have these weapons that were built for war to be able to kill someone, you know, a mile away and go through a helmet and, you know, spit out hundreds and hundreds of bullets. I think that we're going to get close. Again, we were able to work with them on some gun safety issues. I hope we can work with them to ban some of these assault rifles. And I think we're going to get close. I think people were surprised when we got bipartisan support there, and I think we can go further. I hope we do.
Thank you. Mitch.
So it's wonderful to hear you talk about the fact that there is another opportunity for bipartisanship, and I will say that as we think about what's going to happen in the coming months, you know, Congressman Peters, you mentioned the issue around transportation. What's going to be really important, and we ask all this of all three of your offices, is that we be able to really track the progress happening in San Diego. Ellen and I have been working on a project where we're really trying to get a handle around how the community's feeling about certain issues. And it was interesting because in the last poll that was done in June, it clearly spelled out that the Black community does want to see improvements to mass transit. They're not looking at buying EVs. They're looking at what can you do to improve my ability to get to and from anywhere to the next place in mass transit. So Congressman Peters, as the implementation is happening in our minds and the people listening, implementation is how much money is actually flowing into San Diego to create these improvements around things like mass transit and site and cleaning up the environment, because again, clean air is important. So I would say that before Cheryl's going to talk a little bit about, is going to ask you some questions about voting rights, but I want to ask you this question about the one last question on the Inflation Reduction Act. The fact that you got it passed is, you know, was monumental. What's the one thing that you would tell people why this alone should drive them to come out and vote in November? Is there anything you'd say that, because gasoline's coming down in a poll that Ellen and I saw, we have this poll happening every quarter. And in the poll, what gasoline prices was third behind the third most important issue behind homelessness, housing, affordability, and then it was gasoline prices. Gasoline prices are coming down. Homelessness is still a problem, and housing affordability is still a problem. But is the IRA enough, in your opinion, to drive people to want to show up in November? We'll go reverse order. Congressman Vargas, how about you?
Yeah, no, I don't think it's enough. Honestly, there's a whole bunch of other things that are out there that are important. I mean, I take a look at some of the kids in my district, and it's this loan forgiveness, you know, these student loans. I mean, I've always been in favor of loan forgiveness, especially for people that don't make a lot of money or people that are poor. I think it was a great start. I applaud the president. I've already gotten calls from many people in my district saying, you know, I was drowning, and they're Pell Grant recipients. So they're going to get $20,000 reduction, you know, in their loan load. And that's going to be fantastic. I know a couple of them said it's the first time they've ever voted. They're going to vote because of this. I think that drives some people. But the Inflation Reduction Act, I think, was a great piece of work, but I don't think that's necessarily what drives people to vote. I think what's still driving people to vote is Trump. I think what's driving people to vote still is the anger over trying to take our democracy away. Those things drive people to vote. These other things that we did are really, really good, but I don't think it necessarily drives people to vote.
Well, hang on. So there's going to be more questions on midterms after Cheryl's questions, but we'll go. Congressman Peters, what are your thoughts on this? Is it enough IRA, or is there something else?
We're not done. I mean, in climate or healthcare or drug prices. But what we've shown is that Democrats are the party of governing. Even infrastructure, which was bipartisan. I'm so happy it was bipartisan. You know, Trump talked about infrastructure every week and never got anything done. It's the Democrats who are making progress. And if I were, what I would say to voters is if you want a party that's going to solve problems, Democrats are the better bet. The other thing is sort of to touch on what Juan said. I mean, the extremism in today's Republican Party is really stark and scary for a lot of people. If you look at how they're actually treating the January 6th insurrection as a bad tourist event, like trying to excuse that. Donald Trump taking classified documents to Mar-a-Lago, trying to excuse that after Hillary Clinton had communicated with the State Department on a private server without doing anything like that. And the view on Roe versus Wade, I bet this community may be more conservative than a lot of communities on abortion, but would probably support, like most Americans, the ability of a family and a woman to make that decision with her a caregiver, not have politicians like me make that decision for you. So I think people are, as Juan was suggesting, they're a little put off by the real extremism in today's Republican Party, and they can see Democrats as the better choice for problem solving.
Yeah. Congressman Levin.
Well, I agree with what Scott and Juan both said. For me in particular on the climate piece, it's really important to be able to demonstrate that we've delivered results after having the gavels in Congress and having a president who actually wants to address the climate crisis. So that we delivered with the Inflation Reduction Act with a big down payment on what needs to happen is really, really big. But I would say because we're talking to voters every day, we're talking to our constituents every day. I think that the IRA will be one of many things, but it's really about the stakes for freedom and democracy. And they really couldn't be much higher. I think if Republicans get the gavels, I think they're going to move immediately for a nationwide ban on reproductive rights. They've said they will. I think they're going to undermine free and fair elections, and we can get into that. I think they're going to try to raise Social Security and Medicare back and potentially undermine Social Security, raise retirement age, or otherwise jeopardize that social safety net. And then look, a lot of Republicans, I long for the days of, John McCain and Bob Dole and heck, I'll take Mitt Romney over what we're seeing, now. What we're seeing now, you have far too many of them. They're just dismissing that, we faced an unprecedented assault on the U.S. Capitol last January. They're still saying, they're standing up and saying that Trump won, in 2020. They're ultimately now a cult of personality. And I think, people will look at all of these issues and then they'll make their decision. And I trust that people are going to make the right decision on the basis of all the available information.
I appreciate it, gentlemen. We're gonna have one final question around this topic at the end. But Cheryl, we're gonna go over to you now, and you're gonna talk about voting rights.
I got it. Thank you. Actually, we're going to talk about a few things, primarily things that are still on the table insofar as African-American progress is concerned. I do want to just get a real quick response on the Biden debt forgiveness plan. There seems to be some split in the Democratic Party on whether this is too much, too little, or just right. And so I just like, without editorializing, just quick, too much, too little, just right for now. We'll start with Congressman Vargas. You did mention it in your comments.
A good start. We got to do a lot more.
Thank you, Congressman Peters.
I think it's a good start. I think we have to solve the larger problem about college affordability and access to all education, and we haven't done that, and that's a little bit of a disappointment to me.
Thank you, Congressman Levin.
Certain aspects were excellent. The focus on Pell Grant recipients in particular, 90% of the funds going to people making $75,000 a year or less. All of that is excellent. But Scott is right. It's solving the symptom, not the problem. The underlying problem is college affordability. We all, I think, support legislation to double the Pell Grant. I have also another bill to eliminate the federal student loan interest. Both on a go forward basis and looking backward as well. So there's just a whole lot else that we got to do because the Pell Grant doesn't pay for college the way it used to.
Thank you. So education equity, clearly one of the issues that Black Americans are deeply concerned about. Some other things that are still on the table, as Mitch mentioned, voting rights. As was mentioned by Congressman Peters and others, bodily autonomy and certainly privacy, which is connected to that, privacy rights, and then police reform. And I just yes, no, or I don't know, be brief. Are these issues that are disproportionately impact Black Americans as far as you're concerned? Congressman Levin.
Yes.
Congressman Peters.
I think police reform, it's named George Floyd for a reason.
Thank you. We'll have you tackle my next question on that one. And Congressman Vargas.
Yes, of course they are. Yes.
Thank you. So let's start with police reform. The George Floyd Act made it through the House, died, September, December of last year. What's next? What are the obstacles? Without being partisan, I'm talking practical, strategic. How do we advance comprehensive police reform? And if you can tell us in 1 minute, that'd be great.
Who do you want?
You, Congressman
Okay.
Peters.
So I feel like I'm very disappointed with how it went. I think all of us supported the George Floyd bill. There were 5 components of it: chokeholds, if I can remember them, bad cop registry, better police training, prosecutorial reform, and qualified immunity. There were 2 that Republicans were never going to support. I talked to the Black Police Officers Association here. They were very concerned about qualified immunity. We could have got 3 of those though if we had compromised and if we had worked to make progress like we did on the Inflation Reduction Act or like we did on the infrastructure bill. I think we go back to the table, get as much as we can, take half a loaf today and go back next week for the other half, but 0 is not the right answer. We can do better than that, even in this Congress.
Gentlemen, would you agree? Congressman Levin, Congressman Vargas?
I agree with everything Scott just said, and I would only add that we're going to need a new champion in the House of Representatives to work with Senator Booker, Karen Bass, who I think she will be the next mayor of Los Angeles. We're sad, obviously, that she'll no longer be with us in the House of Representatives. So we're just going to need to figure out who will carry that bill forward in the months and years ahead.
Could it be you?
Sure.
Excellent.
Absolutely. I mean,
Congressman Vargas.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Congressman Vargas.
Yes. Well, first of all, with Karen, I was very excited. We've been friends for 20 some years now, and I think I was her second endorser. So she better win mayorship. She's doing great. With respect to what was just said, I agreed actually with everything that was in the George Floyd Act. And I think the president, his executive order did some good things, but we need to do all of those things. And just because the Republicans are saying no, we should push anyway, because all those things are things that we need. And again, sure, let's get as much as we can, but let's not leave anything behind. Let's push for everything.
Thank you. Since as a Latino in the border, I know that your constituencies have the same challenges that many other communities of colors have around voting and access to ballots. What would you say about the challenges that we have to move voting rights forward?
Sure. Well, I think all of us voted for the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, and once again got stuck over in the Senate, like all things do. What we see right now is, especially in the South, they're trying to pass laws to prevent African Americans from voting. I mean, it's very, very clear they're trying to take the votes away. There's no reason to have these rules and laws that they're putting in place. And I think that the Justice Department has to be much more aggressive. We're not getting any help, of course, from the Supreme Court, but we have to do something.
Well, before you move on, actually, I wanted to get the Supreme Court one because that's a biggie. Conversations around expanding the Supreme Court started to percolate up, particularly in most recent days. Or is that the step that's needed? I mean, what's the range of strategy here to try to move voting rights forward? Within a minute, if you can be brief, and then we'll.
Well, I'm probably going to I'm probably going to differ from my colleagues on this one because I do believe in expanding the court. I do think that we have to do things that are outside of the box. The reality is we've moved around the number of Supreme Court justices before, and right now this 6-3 deal is just unfair. I mean, it really is unfair. They're more partisan than we are. So I think that we have to balance off the Supreme Court by putting more justices on there.
Thank you. Congressman Levin, Congressman Peters, yes, no? Should the Supreme Court be expanded so we can pass some of this intractable stuff?
Well, I think there are other ways to do it that might actually pass. I think term limits is where we ought to focus. I think
Supreme Court members?
Yep. I think that we all have term limits. Every 2 years you can boot us out. Supreme Court justice gets on there, they can stay forever. And that is something that I would hope people would be willing to at least have a dialogue about. The other thing is there's legislation out there to dramatically increase the transparency and accountability for members of the Supreme Court. They're the only ones who don't have to report anything about their finances, their stock trading, you name it. And you just take a look at that lack of transparency, and it's pretty stunning. So there's a whole lot we don't know about these 9 Supreme Court justices that would probably shock a lot of people across the United States in terms of their potential for conflict of interest. I think we know one example from Ginny Thomas, from Justice Thomas's wife, and what she may or may not have done in the lead up to the 2020 election. So there's no question we need reform. I'm interested in reforms that will actually pass. Back to your point, I would hope that some of this would be bipartisan. Last thing I'll say, I'm just happy to live in California, where Dr. Weber actually wants everybody eligible to vote, make it easier to do so, not more difficult. And it's disgraceful that we have secretaries of state in some of these states that are going the opposite direction. And I worry a lot about 2024.
Thank you. Congressman Peters, we've heard expand the court. We've heard give them term limits. What are your thoughts on this?
I agree with Mike. I don't think that, I'd love to tell you that the expand the court thing was a possibility. It will not pass. I think we should talk about stuff that's realistic. And I think the hard truth is for Democrats is you got to win elections. Got to put candidates up who will win elections. And winning the elections is what you got to optimize around. That's what keeps Mitch McConnell out of that chair, where he applied one set of rules to President Obama, who had 8 months left in his term. That wasn't enough to consider Merrick Garland. Yet with 3 months left in Trump's term, he rams through Amy Coney Barrett. So we got to win elections is the upshot. I would also say this is the only court without an ethics guidance policy. We've got to get that passed. That's totally fair. And I like the idea of 18 years on the Supreme Court. That's enough time to build up credibility, but not too much time. Stagger it. Let those folks go back to the federal bench so you can still have lifetime appointments to provide independence to the judiciary, but rotate the members of the Supreme Court, I think, would be a lot better system than what we have right now.
Thank you. The last of the 3 things that I mentioned was bodily autonomy. Certainly with the passage of, with the Supreme Court Dobbs ruling, it stripped the the abortion rights of millions of people across the nation. California is lucky. Our Constitution protects voting rights, but we don't necessarily have voting access throughout our state as we should. But the issue of bodily autonomy is more than just abortion rights. It includes a number of different ways in which people, particularly African Americans, have been impacted in the past. Also, privacy issues. African Americans are oftentimes more surveilled than other populations. And so these are things that it opens the door to a number of concerns. And we'll start with you, Congressman Levin, and I will interrupt you if you start getting good and going really long, because we want to hear from everyone. But what are your thoughts on how we continue to protect people's rights to their own body, to make decisions about their own futures in that respect, and to their privacy protections? Again, we're speaking strategically, what we can do, what can happen in your realm, the part of the world that you are in Congress and in our district. So what do we do? How do we continue? How do we protect bodily autonomy and privacy rights?
I'll go as fast as I can. It's what Scott said, win elections. We have to get 2 more Democratic senators. If you had 52 Democratic senators and they were willing to have a carve out for the Women's Health Protection Act to codify Roe, that is the quickest way I could see us reversing the damage done by the Dobbs decision. But make no mistake, the Supreme Court does not represent the vast majority of people in my district or in this country with their extreme decisions that disproportionately impact communities of color as well. When you have to cross state lines in order to get reproductive health care, think of the costs associated with that. Statistic that struck me is Black women are 3 times more likely to die from a pregnancy-related cause than white women are. When you think about the availability of accessing contraceptive care, accessing reproductive care, this is something that we all should care about. And the fact that my daughter, who's now 8 years old, she will have fewer rights than her mom, that's something I never thought I would see in my lifetime. Never thought I would see it. And we have to do everything we can to fight like crazy at the ballot box to ultimately undo this disaster.
Thank you. Congressman Vargas, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I believe in women's reproductive rights, and I think women have the decision to make that only they can make. We shouldn't make it for them. I also agree with you, though, it's more extensive than just that. I mean, it's privacy rights, it's all sorts of other things that I think that this court has been very aggressive against. We have to do something about it. Now, you mentioned, though, something very specific. There's in the area that I represent or what I do in Congress, I'm on financial services with Maxine Waters. This year, we found out something that was really horrible, and we weren't able to correct it. We tried, and that is there is a discrimination that goes on against African Americans that is clear, and that is, and it's long, so I don't want to go too long, but under NAHADA, which is the Native American housing, you also have people who were previously enslaved by the Cherokee Nation and others that live with the tribes on the tribes, and they're discriminated against. They're not considered part of the tribes, even though they've lived with the tribes even before the Civil War. And when housing money goes to the tribes, they don't get it. They don't get any of that money for their housing because they're Black. We put it in the law. We passed it out of the Congress. We went over to the Senate. We couldn't get it through the Senate, so it is stuck right now. But I never knew about that. I mean, there once again, an issue of discrimination is very clear in my particular committee, something that now Maxine Waters and I have been working on very, very closely. But again, you find it that there's obvious discrimination, and it's focused, and it's horrific, and it remains, and we have to do something about it.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And I'm going to kick it back to you, Mitch. I know that we want to hear some closing remarks around the midterm, and I do appreciate all that was said. And I want to flag, perhaps in your closing remarks, Abina raised in the chat, whether we should consider permanently enshrining voting rights in our Constitution. And I would ask the same about some of these other measures that we've mentioned. Thank you, Mitch.
Thank you, Cheryl. So we're going to go back to this midterm discussion, and I'm going to give you an overview, and then I'm going to ask you for 2 minutes of your on your response. Again, I'm going to go back to the Black community, the Latino community. I mean, I think communities in general are saying, look, okay, I know that in the last 6 months, a few things have happened. The Inflation Reduction Act, the infrastructure bill was passed, last year. Student loan forgiveness. You did you did some gun reform, but ultimately, Voting Rights Act, police reform, pay equity, pocketbook issues are still on the minds. And it was interesting. The last 2 NBC polls that happened over the last 3 weeks, some statistics that I want you to respond to. One, 35% said that the best years for the United States are still ahead. 58% said they're already behind. 21% said that the country is headed in the right direction. 74% said we're off track and heading in the wrong direction. There was in the poll, the last poll they took, it said the most important issues were threats to democracy was number one. cost of living was number 2, jobs in the economy was number 3, with a recession looming, on the horizon. And some people say it's already kind of, it's hitting people aggressively because of the cost increases. What do you tell people that gets them to say, you know what, Congressman Vargas, Congressman Levin, Congressman Peters, you're right, we have to win elections. I'm going to show up because I think that you are going to do this, and that's why. And so what's your answer to, again, still behind, best days are behind, we're off in the wrong direction? Because that's what you see, that people are like, I'm not going to show up because they're not going to do anything. Give me your response. And we'll start this time with you, Congressman Peters, then we'll go Congressman Levin, then you, Congressman Vargas.
Great question, Mitch. What I love about being in California, by the way, and being a Democrat is that we're not scared of tomorrow. We are excited about tomorrow and the opportunity that it brings. And that's why the pitch I would make to voters is like, what is it that Republicans are for? I mean, this whole Make America Great Again is an embrace of some of the worst parts of our history, things we've moved past in many respects. And yes, we should make voting rights part of the Constitution. Like free speech. And, one of the things we found out is that it's not in a literal sense, a protected right in the Constitution. We need to make sure that when we talk about one person, one vote, that we put that in the Constitution. But and the reason you talk about midterms, I think it's moving our way, is because we have performed, we have started to solve a lot of the big problems. We made a huge bite in climate change, which I think should excite younger voters. We're standing up for the rights of democracy. Democracy is a choice we make every day. People have sacrificed for it in the past. Republicans used to be for it. Now they seem indifferent to it. It's all about Trump. And we're standing up for freedom. Freedom was always something that Republicans touted. But when you're a woman trying to make decisions about your own body, a family trying to make decisions about your children, we're the party that's saying, get government out of that. So I think that if you want a better tomorrow, if you want to be optimistic, Republicans are really offering only darkness now and no real plans. We're Democrats and Californians, we may be a little bit exuberant. Sometimes we may go too far, but it's never for lack of trying, and it's never for a lack of belief in ourselves and in tomorrow. So that's the side I pick. And I don't know if you said not to be partisan, but sorry about that.
That's fine. I mean, hey, I have a 22 and a 22, 2 daughters, 22 and 20. And I always tell them it's so important to go out and vote. But I've had the pleasure of being friends with you, Congressman Peters and Congressman Vargas, for a long time. My daughters have grown up watching you. But nowadays, Congress 11 is going to go. This goes to you. I try to tell them how important it is to go out and vote. What do you tell them? Why?
First of all, Mitch, I'm more hopeful about this country and our ability to get things done after these last 2 years. Yeah. When I look at this track record, everything that we just talked about, all those different pieces of legislation, many on a bipartisan basis, that's huge. And I'll put that 2-year record of accomplishment up against any 2 years the Republicans have had the gavels, for sure. Remember, when the Republicans last had the gavels, Paul Ryan was the speaker. The first thing they did is pass a tax cut for the very wealthy, where over 80% of the benefit went to the top 1% of taxpayers, blew a $1.9 trillion hole in the debt. You give us the gavels, on the other hand, we pass a bill that actually reduces the deficit by that same amount, 1.9 trillion, while making a historic investment to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, get the climate crisis more under control, and obviously all the benefits around healthcare and prescription drugs that we've been discussing, and finally making big corporations pay their fair share. But I worry about some very basic things that we haven't talked about as much today. I worry about Social Security. I worry about Medicare. I worry about the Affordable Care Act. You still have Republicans going out there saying they're going to undermine and try to eliminate the Affordable Care Act. You have them saying that every 5 years they're going to reassess whether Social Security should continue at all. And it's not any random people in the Republican Party. It's some of the leaders of the Republican Party. You ask Mitch McConnell, well, if you get power, what are you going to do? And he says, I'll tell you after the election. So Scott's right. They're not running on much. And, unfortunately, they're dangerous. They're empowering authoritarianism right now. There's the Democratic, I know we're not supposed to be partisan, but I will say this. There's the Democratic Party and right now the anti-Democratic Party. I long for the Republican Party that shared our values, the Republican Party that now has people like Adam Kinzinger and Liz Cheney who don't have a seat at the table because they actually want to stand up for democracy. So we have a choice we want to make that we have to, in about 72 days with the election, make as a region, as a country. And it's really what kind of future we want to build together. Do we want to lift people up? Do we want to grow the economy from the middle out and the bottom up? Or do we want to just give tax cuts to billionaires? Do we actually want to stand up for women and their rights? Or do we want to undermine those rights, empower the Supreme Court to take more rights away? Do we want to actually build on the progress that we've made with regard to climate? Or do we want to go back to the era where we let big oil write the policy, have dirty air, dirty water, further away from our climate goals as a result? On gun violence, do we want to let the NRA back in charge? Or do we actually want to continue to build on the progress that we're making on gun violence prevention? And then on democracy itself, as I said, do we want to fight for the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act? All three of us served with John Lewis. We were incredibly honored and grateful. I think you guys went to Selma. I got to go to Selma as a freshman and walk the Pettus Bridge with John. And if he were here, he'd just say, keep going, don't give up, keep going, go win some more seats, right? So it's all on the line, both what we have done and what they would do if you give them the chance. And I hope people will see that come November.
Congressman Vargas, I'm going to give you the question, and I will say this. George Washington was once quoted as saying that we needed to beware of the parties. I think today what people are saying is we need to beware of the loss of democracy. But give us your answer on this.
Sure. I think, well, first of all, I'm very optimistic about America. I really am. I do want to one-up my good friend Mike Levin, because I went with John Lewis not only to Selma, but also to Memphis. And so anyway, I've been there a couple of times. John was such a saint. I loved him, and he was wonderful, wonderful man. You know what we are is we're terrible, horrible communicators. The reality is that we're coming out of a pandemic, a real stress test for the world and certainly for the United States. And we haven't been able to let people know, of course, there's going to be dislocation and trouble. This is a pandemic. You know, we talk about inflation, but we never say, by the way, it's not just an American thing. Europe is running hotter than we are. The inflation rate in England is higher than it is here. Many places in Europe, it's higher than it is here. And they haven't had the policies that we've had. It's just the pandemic. But we haven't been able to explain that well. But what we do explain, I think, fairly well, are people of color, at least I do. When people tell me, make America great again, I know what they're saying. They make America white again. That's what they mean. And I think people of color, I think we get that. I mean, I think we get it when the Haitians show up here and they're desperate, they need help, and no one allows them in. The Ukrainians arrive and they open up the gates and they put in the red carpet to come on through. I mean, come on, there's that discrimination. We see all this. And so anyway, I tell people, if you want to make a difference in your own life and the life of your children, go out and vote. And especially if you're a person of color. I do still say, and I've always told my wife, the smartest people in the world are African-American women. They voted 95% against Donald Trump. Us Latinos, we're getting dumber because more of us started to vote for Trump. I mean, I don't understand it at all, but it is what it is. But again, if you believe in your rights as a nation and individual rights, get out there and vote. Get out there and vote your interests. And I think your interests are very clear to see. It's with the Democrats on this.
So before I turn back over to Cheryl, I just want to say one thing. The Justice Department question popped up in the chat box. What we're witnessing now are a bunch of loopholes or holes in the structure that the forefathers never envisioned would be utilized to create chaos. Are some of these holes like the abuse of the Justice Department, right? When you look at all the things by Bill Barr and all the chaos that happened behind the scenes that we're now becoming aware of, can those holes be closed? And that's just simple yes or no. I mean, because some people say, well, yeah, Congress just hasn't passed legislation so that people can't abuse or use the Justice Department in an abusive manner. Is it that simple or is it more complicated? And it's just simple answer, simple or complicated to fix?
Complicated. Because the president appoints. It's very complicated.
Okay.
We had a bill, Mitch, the Protecting Our Democracy Act. It's Adam Schiff's bill. It would close a lot of those gaps but it runs into the same brick wall in the Senate like the rest.
Crazy.
Yeah, it's complicated because a lot of the rules have been unwritten. They've just been observed over time, and
The norms.
yeah, they're norms. And I think you saw President Trump just blow through the norms in a way
Yeah.
that's unprecedented. And now you got the left demanding that President Biden do the same. So I think we all have an interest in both parties in setting out what the rules should be in a specific way. And it's complicated, but we have to do it.
Yep, you need to put it, you need to etch it in stone, because we now, if nothing else, we all as a country have seen what happens when someone says, I don't care what the norms are, I'm going to do my own thing. So, okay, Cheryl, I'll go back to you.
We're out of time, and I do appreciate all of you and Mitch, excellent work. We'll kick it to Ellen to make some closing remarks. See us out.
Thank you. Thank you so much. First, thank our two wonderful moderators, Mitch Mitchell and Cheryl Phelps. Let's give them, thank you. Love you so much. Great, great, great moderation. And we definitely want to thank our elected officials for coming, our Congressman Juan Vargas and our Congressman Scott Peters and our Congressman Mike Levin. I'm mistaken, are the three of you up for re-election or?
Oh yeah.
Every time.
All
Every
the
time.
Oh.
Every
Girl,
time.
I told you that, Ellen.
Okay, you did tell me that.
And Peters
Right, all
is my
three.
congressman.
Who is? Who is?
Scott Peters is my congressman.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Scott
So
Peters is
with
my
that said, can we, I know we're 11:56, can we at least get a minute or two of you just to do some closing remarks? Why should we vote for you? Why should we vote for you? Return you to office.
Scott, we'll start with you, then we'll go Mike, then we'll go with Scott, then Mr. Vargas, then Mr. Levin. Go ahead.
Well, again, thanks to the moderators and for all of you for giving us a chance to talk about this. And also, what you should know is it helps us really focus on and checking in on, are we really looking out for the African-American community? I think we've shown pretty well this year with the bills we've passed. And I hope that you agree that we're serving the entire community throughout the region. I think we work really well together to do that. I would appreciate your vote. My district now goes from Coronado up to Southern Escondido through San Marcos. It's got Hillcrest and North Park in it, new territory for me.
Oh, wow.
We're really enjoying getting to know those new communities, even as we continue to represent the beach communities that we've represented for 10 years. But you should know also that I'm a regionalist. I think all of us are concerned about the whole region and the border and the country. We'll look forward to working with you to make things better and make government work for everybody.
Well, thank you so much, Mitch. Thank you, Ellen and BAPAC. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. It's an honor to get to continue to work with Scott and Juan and Sarah, and yes, Daryl as well. There's just so much that we've done over the last 3.5 years together, but we've got so much work left to do. I see one of my friends in the chat who is a constituent of mine, Rob Howard. He's a great veteran, and I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about just some of the work we've done for veterans in the last 3.5 years as vice chair now of the committee, chair of one of the subcommittees, getting 18 bipartisan veterans bills done in the last 3 years. I'm very proud of that work. It's an example that we can get big things done when we work together, when we believe in one another. And a lot of it is just basic delivering results for our community. All three of us, I know, are working very hard on all the local environmental challenges, all the local infrastructure challenges, and we face a lot of them. We know that Mother Nature always wins, so our coastal economy and our ecosystem is incredibly important. We know that we've got communities that have been overlooked for far too long that need investment. We were proud our office just got $5 million for the Barrio neighborhood in Carlsbad for traffic circles and lighting, just as one of many examples. So we just got to keep working hard for the people of our communities, and we really appreciate your help.
Well, I guess lastly here, I appreciate very much the opportunity to speak today, and more than anything, I appreciate all the support you've given me all these years. I do believe in social justice. I've worked very hard for that. I do see discrimination. I've worked very, very closely with the African-American community my whole life, even before I went into politics as a Jesuit, and look forward to continuing. Now, I was told by my good friend and my chair, Maxine Waters, if I have any problems with anybody, to let her know, and which I will. Maxine and I have become very good friends. I see her almost every day that I'm in Congress because she's my chairwoman. And just turns out that she's a wonderful person. Everyone has a misconception about her. Once you get to know her, she's actually the sweetest person in the world. She really is. Wants to know how your family's doing and everything like that. But she's also can be tough. And she told me, Mr. Vargas, you ever have a problem with anyone down there in San Diego, you let me know. So if any of you guys, you let me know, I'm going to get Maxine, my good friend, on. But I've enjoyed working with her, and there's some things that are so important. Again, I mentioned a little bit the freedmen, but there's other things like the Haitian population that we have to do something about. We have to. It's discrimination that's overt. It's awful, and we just can't let it sit there. Thank you again for supporting me all these years.
Thank you so much. I just want to make just some housekeeping. The chat, we will respond to the chat. We'll send them out to your offices and you can respond. I do want to acknowledge that I appreciate that all of you have hired Black staff. I appreciate that. That was one of our main cries at some of our last meetings with you. You've responded. I want to commend you in that regard. Also, the survey that Mitch is referring to with our top 3 or 4 issues from our survey, we will also want to send that to you, and we would ask that you respond with some of your plans in order to address those, particularly homelessness, housing, and affordability. The top 3 here that we've done in regards to that. And we want to thank you again. Yes, we will have many more of these. We're going to be on this journey all the way up through November 8th. I'm going to put Mitch and Cheryl to work all the way up through November the 8th because they're the best at this moderating in order to represent the interests, particularly of African Americans. I appreciate that. And if anyone on this line or on Facebook Live and YouTube wants to join BAPAC, you can go to bapacsd.org. I have my vice chair online here, Elise Picken Allen. One of our board members I saw is here. And thank you, Dr. Follow. We have a little bit of everything. This is at 11 o'clock, but it's Facebook Live and YouTube. So you can go back anytime up through November 8th to refer back to these presentations. They will be here for the rest of our lives. And we want to say great afternoon and have a great week. And we'll see you again. Thank you.
Thank you.
you.